Rage 2, the post-apocalyptic first-person shooter video game developed by Avalanche Studios and ID Software, was released in 2019 to mixed reviews. Some critics praised its high-octane action and open-world gameplay, while others criticized its repetitive missions and lackluster story. But one thing is for sure, Rage 2 was a wild and wacky adventure that left a lasting impression on players. Rage 2 was eagerly anticipated by fans of the original game, which was released in 2011. The sequel promised to deliver even more action-packed mayhem in a sprawling post-apocalyptic world. When the game was finally released, it quickly became apparent that it was a mixed bag of positives and negatives. Some critics praised the game's action, which involved players using a wide array of weapons to take on waves of enemies. The combat was fast-paced and intense, with players constantly on the move to avoid incoming fire and find new targets. The game also featured an open-world environment that allowed players to explore and discover new locations, encounter characters, and take on various missions. However, other critics were less impressed with the game's missions, which often involved players performing similar tasks in different locations. The story was also criticized for being lackluster and unoriginal, failing to provide a compelling narrative to drive the action. These criticisms resulted in mixed reviews for the game, with some reviewers hailing it as a masterpiece of action and others dismissing it as a forgettable romp through a generic wasteland. Despite the misreception from critics, it was clear that Rage 2 left an impression on players. The over-the-top action and absurd characters, combined with the open-world exploration and diverse weapon arsenal, made for a unique gaming experience that stood out from the crowd. The game also had a sense of humor, with plenty of jokes and pop culture references sprinkled throughout. All of this is to say that Rage 2 is not a perfect game, but it is certainly an entertaining one. The high-octane action and open-world gameplay provides plenty of thrills, and the wacky characters and humor keeps players engaged and entertained. Despite the criticisms leveled at the game, it was clear that it made an impact on the gaming world. And without further ado, let's get into our 5 main topics today. And make sure to subscribe and press the bell below. Did you know that... I'm kidding, guys. Enjoy the video. First and foremost, Rage 2 was all about the weapons, from the devastating grav dart launcher to the electrifying hyper cannon. There was no shortage of firepower at your disposal, but the real star of the show was the BFG 9000, a massive energy weapon that could obliterate entire armies with a single shot. If you were feeling particularly sadistic, you could even upgrade it to fire multiple projectiles at once. Who needs subtlety when you can just blow everything up? The weaponry in Rage 2 was undoubtedly one of the game's biggest selling points. The sheer variety of weapons available ensured that no two battles felt exactly the same, and players had a vast array of options when it came to laying waste to their enemies. The grav dart launcher was a weapon that fired small darts that would attach themselves to any surface, including enemies. Once enough darts were stuck to an enemy, the weapon could be activated, causing the enemy to be pulled towards the point of impact and collide with whatever surface the darts were attached to. It was a satisfyingly visceral weapon, and it was always entertaining to watch enemies flail helplessly through the air as they were drawn towards their doom. The hyper cannon, on the other hand, was a devastatingly powerful energy weapon that could be charged up to deal even more damage. It fired bolts of lightning that could bounce between multiple enemies, meaning that it was a great option for taking out large groups of foes all at once. If you were lucky, you might even be able to take out an entire convoy of vehicles with a single shot. But the undisputed king of the weapons in Rage 2 was the BFG 9000. This massive energy weapon was capable of obliterating entire armies with a single shot, and it was a thing of beauty to watch as it unleashed its power on the battlefield. If that wasn't enough, you sadist, you could even upgrade it to fire multiple projectiles at once, turning the already deadly weapon into an unstoppable force of destruction. Of course, using the BFG 9000 was not always the most subtle or strategic option. It was often more efficient to take out enemies one by one, using a combination of stealth and precision to stay alive. But where's the fun in that? Sometimes you just want to watch the world burn, and the BFG 9000 was the perfect tool for the job. In conclusion, the weapons in Rage 2 were a joy to use, and added a layer of excitement to the game that is hard to match. The Grav Dart Launcher, Hyper Cannon, and even the BFG 9000 were just a few of the many weapons at the player's disposal, and each one felt unique and satisfying to use. Whether you were a fan of subtlety or preferred to blow everything up, Rage 2 had a weapon that was perfect for you. Of course, no video game is complete without its fair share of bugs and glitches, and Rage 2 was no exception. Players reported everything from enemies getting stuck in walls to entire missions failing to load properly. But perhaps the most memorable glitch was the flying car bug glitch, which caused vehicles to launch into the air and soar across the map like they're auditioning for a Fast and Furious movie. It wasn't exactly intentional, but it sure was fun to watch. The infamous flying car glitch. In Rage 2, it's hard to forget the sight of a mundane vehicle suddenly taking flight and soaring through the air like it had been launched by a rocket. And it wasn't just a one-time thing either. This seemed to happen frequently and at random, which only added to its appeal. Bugs and glitches are a common occurrence in the world of video games, and Rage 2 was full of them. While some glitches were harmless and even hilarious, others could be frustrating and game-breaking. One of the most common glitches in Rage 2 was the enemy AI getting stuck in walls or objects, making them unable to move or attack. This could be especially problematic during intense firefights, as it left players with fewer enemies to battle and an unfair advantage. Not that the players always seemed to complain, but it did leave some missions where the requirement was killing a certain amount of enemies, which would lead some quests incomplete and some gamers very jaded. Another issue that plagued some players was entire missions failing to load properly. This meant that players would be stuck in a never-ending loading screen, unable to progress any further in the game. Some players reporting having to restart the entire game or even reinstalling to fix the problem. In addition to these more serious glitches, there were plenty of humorous ones that players encountered during their time with Rage 2. For example, some players reported seeing enemies walking on air, vehicles flying through the sky, and characters appearing with missing textures or features. But despite these glitches, players found ways to work around them and still enjoy the game's fast-paced action and open-world exploration, as empty as it was. Some even saw the glitches as part of the game's charm, adding to the game's overall sense of unpredictability and mayhem. Overall, while the bugs and glitches in Rage 2 may have been frustrating at times, they were a small price to pay for the game's fun and entertaining gameplay. And who knows, maybe the next time you're playing a game and encounter a bug, most likely a Bethesda game, you'll be able to laugh it off and appreciate it for what it is. Just another wacky and unpredictable part of the gaming experience. That is, unless you have to reinstall. One of the most unique features of Rage 2 was its nanotrite abilities, which gave players superhuman powers like telekinesis and energy seals. But the real standout was the Shatter ability, which allowed you to create a shockwave that could send enemies flying in all directions. It was like playing a game of human pinball, and it never got old. The nanotrite abilities in Rage 2 were truly a game changer. As players progressed through the game and completed various missions and challenges, they would unlock new abilities that would allow them to do things that would be impossible in the real world. For example, the Slam ability allowed players to jump into the air and then come crashing down with tremendous force, creating a shockwave that damaged nearby enemies and objects. This was incredibly useful for clearing out large groups of enemies or destroying environmental objects. The Dash ability allowed players to move at lightning speeds in any direction, making it easy to dodge enemy attacks or get to hard to reach places. And the Barrier ability created an impenetrable shield that could protect the player from incoming attacks. But perhaps the most fun of all the nanotrite abilities was the Shatter ability. With this ability, players could unleash a powerful shockwave that would send enemies flying in all directions, causing them to collide with walls, objects, or even other enemies. It was like playing a game of human pinball. Picture this, you're surrounded by a group of heavily armed enemies with no clear escape. You activate your Shatter ability and suddenly everything changes. A wave of energy radiates out from you, knocking the enemies off their feet and sending them hurtling through the air like rag dolls. They collide with walls, furniture, and even each other. You can't help but feel a sense of satisfaction as you watch them go flying. But the Shatter ability wasn't just fun to use, it was also incredibly useful. It was a great way to deal with large groups of enemies quickly and efficiently, and it was also useful for moving enemies out of your way or clearing a path to your objectives. Overall, the nanotrite abilities in Rage 2 were a great addition to the game, adding a whole new dimension to the gameplay and giving players a sense of power and control that they might not have experienced in other first-person shooters. And the Shatter ability was a standout feature that made the game even more enjoyable to play. The characters in Rage 2 were also a memorable bunch, from the gruff protagonist Walker to the eccentric villain General Cross, but perhaps the most memorable character of all was Lusum Hogger, the leader of the Resistance and the owner of the most outrageous hairdo in all of video game history. Seriously, that thing could give Marge Simpson a run for her money. The characters in Rage 2 were, for better sense of the word, electric, each with their own distinct personality and quirks. The game's protagonist Walker was a gruff and very stoic wasteland ranger with a tragic backstory. He didn't say much, but his actions spoke louder than words, as he laid waste to the game's numerous enemies with his impressive array of weapons and abilities. General Cross, the game's villain, was equally memorable, with his over-the-top personality and penchant for maniacal laughter. He was a former ally of Walker's, but had gone rogue and was now leading a powerful army of mutants and bandits in a bid for domination. His obsession with power and control made him a formidable foe, and players couldn't help but love to hate him. But the supporting cast of characters in Rage 2 were equally memorable, from the quirky members of the Resistance to the various merchants and traders scattered throughout the game's vast open world. The Resistance was led by the charismatic and feisty Lusum Hogger, a tough-as-nails woman with an outrageous hairstyle and a heart of gold. She was always ready to lend a hand to Walker and the player, offering up missions and assistance when needed. Other memorable characters included Clegg Clayton, a sleazy and conniving businessman who would stop at nothing to get what he wanted, and Dr. Antonin I'll put it on the screen, it's hard to say his last name. A brilliant but eccentric scientist who provided Walker with powerful nanotrite abilities. The characters in Rage 2 were brought to life with impressive voice acting and well-written dialogue, which made them feel like real individuals with their own hopes, fears, and motivations. Whether players were fighting alongside them or against them, each character added depth and flavor to the game's story and world. Overall, the characters in Rage 2 were a vital part of the game's appeal and helped to make the world of the Wasteland feel alive and vibrant. Their unique personalities and quirks helped to create an immersive and engaging experience that players won't soon forget. Finally, let's not forget about the game's soundtrack, which was a mix of punk rock, heavy metal, and electronic music. A highlight was undoubtedly Let's Work Together by Canned Heat, which played during the game's epic final battle. There's nothing quite like mowing down hordes of enemies to the sweet sounds of classic rock. The soundtrack of Rage 2 was a key component in creative and immersive and exciting experience for players. The game's developers carefully selected a mix of punk rock, heavy metal, and electronic music that perfectly complemented the game's fast-paced and action-packed gameplay. The music in Rage 2 was not just a background feature, it was a driving force in the game's narrative. Each track was chosen to match the mood and tone of the scene it accompanied. For example, during the game's most intense battles, players were treated to some of the heaviest and most aggressive music in the game, while during the more contemplative moments, the music was more subdued and introspective. But the standout track of the entire soundtrack was Let's Work Together by Canned Heat. This classic rock anthem played during the game's epic final battle, and it perfectly captured the intensity and excitement of the moment. The song's upbeat tempo, catchy chorus, and driving rhythm were the perfect accompaniment to the player's triumph over the game's final boss. I will not be including it here for copyright reasons, of course. The use of classic rock music in video games is not a new concept, but Rage 2 took it to a whole new level. The game's developers went out of their way to select tracks that not only matched the game's aesthetic, but also served as homage to the classic rock music of the 70s and 80s. By including such iconic tracks as Let's Work Together, Rage 2 gave players a true rock and roll experience that will be remembered long after the game is over. In conclusion, the soundtrack of Rage 2 was a true masterpiece that perfectly captured the spirit of the game. From the intense heavy metal tracks to the soulful classic rock anthems, the music in Rage 2 was an integral part of the game's experience. And while there are many memorable tracks in the game's soundtrack, Let's Work Together by Canned Heat will always be remembered as the highlight of the game's musical journey. Despite its many flaws, there's no denying that Rage 2 was a highly entertaining and enjoyable game. From the moment you picked up your first weapon and started blasting away at hordes of enemies, it was clear that this was a game that wasn't afraid to go over the top and embrace its own absurdity. The game's open world gameplay also provided players with a lot of freedom to explore and experiment, whether it was taking on enemy outposts, scavenging for resources, or simply driving around the game's vast post-apocalyptic landscape. And with a variety of different vehicles at your disposal, including buggies, motorcycles, and monster trucks, getting around the world was always a blast. But what really set Rage 2 apart from other first-person shooters was its quirky and memorable characters, from the aforementioned Lucem Hogger and her outrageous hairdo, to the mad scientist Dr. K, we'll call him Dr. K, who had a habit of cackling maniacally as he worked on his latest inventions. The game was full of oddball personalities that added a lot of color and humor to the experience. Of course, it wouldn't be a Rage game without some seriously explosive weapons, and Rage 2 certainly didn't disappoint in that regard. The game's massive arsenal of weapons included everything from rocket launchers and grenade launchers to the aforementioned BFG 9000, which could wipe out entire armies with a single shot. And with the ability to upgrade and customize your weapons, you always had a reason to keep exploring and fighting. Despite its, yes of course, many flaws, it's clear that Rage 2 was a game that was designed to be fun above all else. Whether you were launching cars into the stratosphere, mowing down enemies with your trusty shotgun, or just explore the game world and interacting with its zany characters. There was always something to enjoy. And while it may not go down in history as one of the greatest games of all time, it's definitely a game that will be remembered fondly by those who have played it and enjoyed it. What's up everyone, Jay here, coming at the end of the video to just say thank you for watching, and if you really enjoyed the content I put out this time, please subscribe and hit that bell below. I always appreciate it. If you want to catch me playing some of these games that I review for these retrospectives and such, you can check me out on Twitch at twitch.tv at jtheshogun and all that jazz. Anyway, thank you for watching. Bye.